Hello and welcome back. It's Morgan Lakes here, reporting from Lexington, Kentucky, and today is Thursday, the 11th of October of the year 2018. On this week's episode of the Universal Bathtub, we are getting down and dirty when discussing the deadly details of the Krolac.
Chlorine-resistant Lactobacillus, or Krolac for short, took over local news headlines in late September of 2018, as it became the deadly killer of approximately half of swimmers occupying the Universal Bathtub, aka Lancaster Aquatic Center, but commonly referred to as the LAC by students, specifically swimmers. Before we look into how the disease began, spread, and killed off the UK men's swim team, let's take a look at lifestyle and habits of swimmers. First and foremost, collegiate swimmers are often very tired and worn down from waking up early to complete morning practices, going to classes all day, practicing again in the afternoon, and staying up late each night to study, all while trying to squeeze in times to eat. You may think that a Division I athlete eats all the time. However, their intense class and practice schedule makes it very hard to allocate time to eat. Now we will examine a male swimmer's routine during practice, as they practice separately from the women's team, where they are exposed to many germs and bacteria both in the locker room and on the pool deck, from a variety of sources. For example, at the beginning of practice, each swimmer will lay their equipment directly on the pool deck. Throughout the workout, when the intervals get faster and their rest becomes shorter, swimmers become tired and fatigued, and when equipment changes are necessary, everyone will grab for any equipment they can find, whether it is theirs or not. This same progression of events occurs with the swimmers' water bottles and Gatorade cups throughout the practices. Another source of the spreading of germs during practices happens when the swimmers are lined up right behind each other in lanes, and as the intervals get faster and rest gets shorter, the swimmer's heart rate rises and they begin to breathe harder and inadvertently on the person in front of them. As practices end, each swimmer gathers their equipment and grab a towel as they head to the locker rooms. This constant share of equipment, water bottles, towels, and unintentional breathing on one another caused the swimmers to be immunocompromised and exponentially promoted the spread of disease among the team. I sat down with University of Kentucky swim team manager Chad Barnes, who survived the deadly epidemic but was present to experience the disease epidemic unravel and can provide insight to the close proximity of the UK men's swim team and how it could have contributed to the spread of Krolac.
Hello, Chad. Thanks for speaking with me today.
No problem. I'm happy to be here.
As you know, Krolac quickly overtook the men's locker room at the LAC and caused chaos among the swim team. How did the team handle this devastating outbreak?
It was really tough. They tried to balance a rigorous practice schedule and constant pressure to get better with the deadly epidemic that was closing in on them. We were all feeling stressed and scared to say the very least.
I'm sure. From what you recall, can you briefly explain the route and destruction Krolac took as it killed off all the men's swim team?
All I can remember is that it began with one swimmer who had a swollen red bump on the back of their leg. The bump became bigger and began to ooze pus, and the swimmer developed a fever. The team athletic trainer diagnosed him with what she thought was a spider bite. His conditions and symptoms began to worsen, and the other swimmers began presenting with similar issues before we knew the entire men's team was too ill to practice. As time went on, swimmers were being hospitalized, and when no physician could cure this disease, our swimmers began to die quickly. It was really sad.
I'm so sorry to hear that, but thank you for sharing. In an effort to try to understand more about this Krolac and its rapid spread and fatal nature, can you share some of the details regarding the team's close proximity?
They are almost always in close proximity, as you may have assumed, whether it be in the pool, in the locker rooms, or the dryland mats with their equipment bags, towels, or water bottles.
Oh wow. I'm sure this close proximity contributed to the rapid spread of disease across the team. Well, thank you so much for your input. I'm confident this will add significant information to the files regarding this disease.
This is what we already know about Krolac. It is a bacterial infection acquired by the worsening of an ordinary Lactobacillus bacteria that has become resistant to chlorine. Individuals will acquire this severe case of Lactobacillus if the bacteria enter the body through an open wound or cut. This disease is similar to MRSA in the ways that it spreads through skin-to-skin contact and presents with similar symptoms such as painful skin boils that are warm to the touch and full of pus, accompanied by a fever. Mild symptoms of Krolac appear between 1 and 10 days after being exposed to the contaminated bacteria, but quickly worsen. So this is how the story goes. Practices were just beginning again for the UK swim team during the second week of August. During the beginning of the season, dryland practices were held the first hour, followed by an hour of swimming. As the team would rush in from running with wobbly legs and sore bodies, they would be hurried along by the eager coaches to hurry and change into their suits to begin the swim portion of the practice. The athletes would run to their respective locker rooms and change as fast as their lethargic bodies would allow, using any aid they could to alleviate the pain they felt from that day's workout, including the locker room benches. As the week came to an end, each team headed out on a retreat. The women's team to the lake and the men's team to Red River Gorge. One swimmer came back from the trip with a small bump on the back of his leg, to which both he and the athletic trainer agreed was the result of a spider bite he acquired from the team retreat and was prescribed an antibiotic. As the team returned home from the retreat and practices began again, the swimmer noticed the bump was growing bigger and becoming more painful. He went back to the athletic trainer with complaints of pain and a fever, but she still had no answer other than the bump was a spider bite, and prescribed him more antibiotics and suggested a visit to the doctor. After visiting the doctor, who also suggested that the small red swollen bump was a spider bite and the fever was a consequence of that, he prescribed more antibiotics to ease the swimmer's pain and rid of the bump. However, little did the doctor know that the swimmer had developed the chlorine-resistant strain of Lactobacillus. A week had passed and the swimmer's bump had grown and become a large, dark red, swollen, painful, warm-to-the-touch bump full of pus that was infecting his own bones, joints, bloodstream, lungs, and urinary tract, and spreading the disease to others on his team. A couple weeks after first recognizing the small bump, the first swimmer of the entire men's swim team had died of Krolak, and unfortunately, many more men's swimmers had become infected. During the time of infection, the swimmer continued to share his equipment, towels, and water bottle with other boys on the team, which spread the disease even faster. By the middle of September of 2018, all the UK men's swim team had died. To better understand why the chain of events explained above happened as they did, we will take a closer look at the case. As we heard from Chad Barnes, Krolak spread rapidly and without bias across the men's swim team. The swimmer who first contracted Krolak more than likely had contracted the original Lactobacillus bacteria from within the pool or locker room, though we are still unsure. The bacterium began on the back of his leg and without his knowing entered through an open wound, thus progressing the disease to become the more serious and severe bacterial strain that is resistant to chlorine treatment, aka Krolak. As the disease progressed, so did the site of the outbreak on his leg, that was still assumed to be a spider bite. The swimmer's particular strain of Lactobacillus was resistant to chlorine treatment because his body had been unnecessarily introduced and inappropriately prescribed other antibiotics to treat ordinary Lactobacillus for far too long. Due to the swimmer's repetitive use of antibiotics as a means for fighting off germs, he was actually creating drug-resistant bacteria, because not every germ was killed when targeted by any specific antibiotic, so those that survived began to resist other methods of treatment, such as chlorine. The swim team was at particularly high risk for spread of Krolak because of the constant close proximity and share of personal items and equipment that occurred. When the first swimmer became infected with Krolak, male swimmers who shared towels, sat on the same benches in the locker room, shared equipment, or even came in contact with one another quickly became contaminated and ill from the disease. In addition, constant interaction with the unsanitary conditions of the men's locker room aided in the spread of Krolak among the team. The timing of this epidemic is important to note. After the first swimmer noticed the bump on the back of his leg, he had been carrying the bacteria for the max 10-day incubation period of Krolak. During this time, many other swimmers were coming into contact with the contaminated swimmer and his personal items, thus contracting the disease themselves without knowing. Once the first swimmer contaminated realized his symptoms were worsening and proving to not be a spider bite, as the athletic trainer and doctor had diagnosed, the disease had spread like rapid fire through the entirety of the men's team because of their close proximity and lack of keeping personal items, well, personal. The spread of disease happened so quickly and unknowingly that by the time doctors figured out what was happening, the entire team was infected and past the point of being able to be cured.
Hello, this is Dr. Jackson from Kentucky Clinic, calling with the results of the research findings from the patient report you requested. The patient was a 21-year-old male who suffered from a fever and a large red, swollen, painful bump filled with pus that burrowed deep into his body, causing infections in his bones, joints, bloodstream, lungs, and urinary tract that ultimately resulted in his death. After many tests were completed, the disease was caused by an infectious bacterium referred to as Krolak. Symptoms started out mild, but progressed quickly to become invasive to the body and eventually deadly. Time of death was 8:38 a.m. on August 20, 2018. Duration of the disease was 10 days. Please call me back if you have any questions.
The previous phone call released from Dr. Jackson at the Kentucky Clinic, who completed research on subjects and the disease. The call described the first fatality from Krolak on the UK men's swim team. By September 28, all of the men's swim team had died. After further consultation with Dr. Jackson, her research team, and the health department and CDC, who inspected the common areas of all the male UK swimmers, determined that the first case of Krolak began with a swimmer who contracted the disease from the private UK men's locker room bench. The investigation led to the bench in the men's locker room because the CDC knew with an outbreak like Krolak that is similar to MRSA, the bacterium had to enter by direct contact through an open wound with a person who carries the bacteria strain known as Krolak. This explains why the outbreak remained within the men's team and didn't spread beyond to the women's team or to the public. After the death of half of the UK swim team as a whole, stricter rules were enforced regarding the sharing of equipment, water bottles, and towels to protect the team. Now each swimmer is required to have their own, and absolutely no sharing is allowed. In addition, the health department and CDC were brought to the pool to inspect the area to ensure it was clean and safe for the swimmers to continue on with practices. They also implemented new governmental protocol requiring all public pools to be inspected for the presence of Krolak in an effort to protect society from this deadly disease. In addition, the CDC released a statement saying that in any case of a spider bite that did not heal or show signs of healing within 3 to 4 days must report to a local hospital to be tested for Krolak. We will now shift gears to discuss epidemiology and the unwanted presence it has made in the world from early on until now, and the advances that have been made with respect to science, medicine, and technology along the way. According to the Black Death, the greatest catastrophe ever reading, it was believed that individuals became ill because it was God's will or punishment for a particular act. Moving forward in time to the yellow fever epidemic, people still believed that faith was tied to their probability of contracting a disease. It was during the cholera epidemic that the miasma theory emerged, which according to doctors and scientists during the time, stated that all smell is disease. It was also during this time that John Snow became famous for his waterborne theory to explain how cholera began and spread. The most significant shift in mindset was made during the Spanish flu pandemic. According to the What About the Flu reading, there was a shift from miasma theory to germ theory, and from faith-based punishment to science. This was a major turning point in the advancement in evidence for epidemics and pandemics occurring around the world. Understanding how a disease begins, recognizing symptoms of a disease and how it quickly can spread, and participating in treatment prevention plans has greatly advanced epidemiology over time. The causes of many diseases and outbreaks early on was due to unsanitary living conditions, poor hygiene, and close quarters. Today, we are noticing that diseases are starting and spreading because prevention measures such as vaccinations, hand washing, cleaning wounds and keeping them covered, treating illness and avoiding others when contagious, and proper personal hygiene and cleaning measures are being neglected. Krolak ultimately continued among the same trend of the way people viewed epidemiology, in that they trusted science as a means for understanding and treating the disease. This outbreak encouraged the public to take precautionary measures when attending public pools, as they are hubs for many bacteria, as well as keeping personal items very personal. Had the doctors treating the swimmers understood the depths of this disease and the fact that it was resistant to chlorine, a treatment that will typically eradicate the original Lactobacillus bacteria and not just a simple spider bite, Krolak would not have affected the UK men's swim team to the degree that it did, and it ultimately would not have been considered an epidemic.
This rare bacterial outbreak may leave us wondering, are there more unknown bacterium with deadly side effects lingering in the places we spend time? Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of the Universal Bathtub.